Very good. Well, today I'm excited. We're beginning the book of Daniel today. And anytime you look at the book of Daniel, you should be excited. And this week, I don't know what to tell you, I started studying on Sunday. And as the week progressed, I said, this amazing book, the book of Daniel. Just chapter 1. The amazing thing about the book of Daniel is the book of Daniel was written a long time ago, and we place it 500 years before Jesus, and we know it because chapters 2 through chapter 7 are the old language. It's not a new language. It's the Aramaic language that was used in the time of the Babylonians, and that's what it was written in. And Daniel has a parallel in his book, in this little letter that Daniel has, only 12 chapters. We divide it usually into two things, the narratives and the prophetic. And chapter 1 through 6 we consider to be the narrative, although you have to add 10 to that. And there's parallels. Chapter 2 and 7 are parallels because they deal with the world kingdoms. 3 and 4 are parallel because, 3 and 6 are parallel because one is throwing the three guys in the fire and the other's throwing Daniel in the lion's den. And then chapter 4 and 5 are parallel because it deals with the first king of New Babylon and the last king of New Babylon. So there's a lot of parallels here, and when you get into the prophetic things, we realize that chapter 7 presents the world empires as beasts, and 8 is an amplification of 7, 9 is an amplification of 8, 10 is a window into what's happening behind the scenes, 11 is the final answer for Daniel, and it brings us down to our time, 11 verses 40 to 45, and then chapter 12 is the conclusion. So Daniel's an interesting book, very short, but yet filled with a lot of things. And what I found is that because I'm preaching on Daniel at the other church, I thought it was Henry that asked me last Sabbath. He said, Pastor, are you going to find that the sermons are exactly the same? Actually, if you can go online and look at Daniel chapter 1 that I probably preached a few months ago in Fremont, it's not going to be the same as Daniel 1 today. Even though Daniel 1's the same, you're a different church and the needs that we have are a little bit different. But this week I got a call. Got a call from a gal who I hadn't heard from in a long time. One of my first churches that I had, she was one of the members, so when I got the call, I was under the impression that maybe there was a loss in the family or something like that when you don't hear from members for a long time. She said, well, Pastor, you're the only one that I felt I could talk to. I said, okay, what seems to be the problem? She said, has the Seventh-day Adventist Church changed their position? And I said, well, what position would you be talking about? She said, when I was a little girl, now she's in her 80s right now, Rudy. So when she was a little girl, she said, they were told that if they stepped foot into a movie theater, the angels would stay outside, and whatever happened inside, they were on their own. She said, do you remember that, Pastor? I said, well, I'm not quite your age, but I do remember the statement. In fact, I remember the horror story of when I was first told that. I was just a young man, and they said, if the theater burns down, God's not going to rescue you. And I can remember as a young man thinking, what would happen if a whole Christian group went in? That's a lot of angels sitting outside. Okay? You understand what I'm saying? That's a lot. Okay? But some of you remember the story, and she was confused. And I said, well, notice I didn't answer the question. I said, well, why are you asking the question? She said, because, Pastor, they are promoting this movie at our church. And I said, well, what movie would that be? She said, Pastor, you mean to tell me they're not promoting it at your church? And I said, well, I'm the pastor, and I don't remember promoting a movie. She said, you know who Desmond Doss is? And I said, I don't know him, but I read the book a long time ago. And she said, it's called Hacksaw Ridge. She said, in our church they're promoting it to the point that they want us all to go see the movie. And while we go, they want us to take literature with us to hand out to the people in the movie theater. And she said, Pastor, do you think we can hand out things inside the movie theater? I said, I don't know. I wouldn't trust it, you know. I said, you can hand out popcorn. But I don't know about literature. And she said, well, has the church changed their position? Because this is an Adventist movie. And I said, well, first of all, it's not an Adventist movie. She said, I heard it's rated R, Pastor. She said, well, Pastor, what should I do? I'm just telling you. That's one of those questions I do not like. Because I can't tell people what to do. You understand? Now, she could have said, Pastor, are you going to see the movie? But she didn't say that, okay? She said, Pastor, what should I do? You know me, kind of quick on thinking. It didn't take me a while to think. I said, wait for it to come on DVD, and you can watch it. What else am I going to tell her? If she went to the movie and it burned down, who would be at fault? You see? I can't make that decision for her. You understand? But for her, she was at the point. I think she even told me on Mondays they have senior discount. Now, see, I don't know that, okay? All right? Although, you know, I did have somebody that said to me, Pastor, come with me to the movie to watch Hacksaw Ridge. I'll even pay for you to go in to the movie. As you know, it's not about money, is it? Okay. Should it matter whether the church has changed their position or not? Should the decisions we make be based on what the church says and not says? Where do we draw the line? Where do you draw the line? Do you draw the line on the outside of the church, of the movie theater? Or if it's rated G, I talked to someone else this week, I shared with them the story, and they said, oh yeah, I rated for Fantasia to come in the movies, and I went and saw it rated G, and they said, there was some weird people in there, I had to leave. Where do we draw the line? Where is there a line? Is there a line that constantly moves? Where do we draw the line? Daniel 1 is about drawing the line. Did you know that? Listen to the verse. We're going to go through Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. I gave you time to get there. You know where it is, right? Okay. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put the treasures, where? In the house of his God. We can stop there. We don't have to look at the rest of the chapter. Because in that chapter, in those 3 verses, is so much. Now, here's the amazing thing. A few years ago, by few I mean about 10 years ago, they found a library in Babylon that was made up of cuneiform tablets. Now, cuneiform is a little bit different than hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics is they show a picture and the picture represents something. Cuneiform, they took a wedge-shaped stick or pencil, if you want to call it, and they would put it on clay that was still soft, and it would make almost all types of web-shaped things, and that was considered their letters. And they're called cuneiform tablets because they were on baked clay, and they found this library, and in there they found the records of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the interesting thing about the letters that they found is they found out that he only attacked Jerusalem 2 times. Now, you might say, I hope you're saying, wait a minute, Pastor, I know he attacked them 3 times. How do you know he attacked them 3 times? See, I'm checking your knowledge here because you have to know he attacked them 3 times. You're supposed to say, he took Jehoiakim, number 1. Number 2, what happened? He went back, and who did he take captive? Okay, what book comes before Daniel? Ezekiel. He took Ezekiel on the 2nd captivity. And what happened on the 3rd? He destroyed Jerusalem. Now, those dates we already know in history. 586 is one of those pillars in history that you know. 586 BC was when Jerusalem was destroyed. When Jeremiah stayed behind. When he told everyone to submit to Nebuchadnezzar, go to Babylon, and God would bring them back after 70 years. By the way, Daniel went on the first one. Why don't these cuneiforms say that Nebuchadnezzar went twice? Because as King Nebuchadnezzar, he only went twice. When Nebuchadnezzar went, and this time, and we know the date of this, 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was not the king. Nebuchadnezzar was the general of the army. His dad, Nabopolassar, was king. And guess what? While he was destroying Jerusalem, his dad died. And if Nebuchadnezzar did not get back to the kingdom, guess what? Somebody else would take it. Now, if you can picture where Jerusalem is, and you can picture where Babylon is, there's 2 ways to go. You can go the easy route by foot, and it will take you about 6 months. Now, just in case you're wondering, Pastor, how do you know that? Because you just need to go to the book of Ezra and see how long it took Ezra to get from Babylon to Jerusalem. He actually tells you it took about 6 months. Now, can you imagine if Nebuchadnezzar waited for all his men and all the prisoners and all the things that they took? Guess what? Someone else is going to be king. History tells us that what Nebuchadnezzar did is he took the hard way. He hopped on his horse and went straight across the desert to Babylon and made it in 10 days. This is Nebuchadnezzar. And he got there in time to be coronated king of Babylon. So Daniel, as he wrote this, already calls him king, because before they got there, he was already king. Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon. He defeated Jerusalem twice. 605 BC, Daniel and his friends were part of the first group, along with the vessels that Nebuchadnezzar took. Now, the interesting thing is, it took them about 6 months to get there. Those of you from another country, if you're born in another country, and if you're like Nelson, his family had to flee when the government was taken over. If you're like that and you come to a different country where you don't speak their language, and it's not your homeland, you're going to look at the new country a little bit different. That's Daniel and his friends. They had to decide, where are they going to draw the line? Where would you draw the line? You don't want people to make fun of you, do you? You want to fit in, don't you? You want to look like everybody else, sound like everybody else, and think like everybody else? You don't want to be different, do you? What do you think they thought about that whole 6 months? I was talking to somebody this week, and here's what they said to me. You don't really believe all those stories in the Bible, do you? They said, most of them are made up. I said, really? They're only there to teach a story. They're not real stories. They said, they're just like Mother Goose. They're just like the Grimm brothers from Germany. They're like the Tales of Aladdin. What do you think about that? They said they're only there to teach lessons. I said, I believe them. I said, they do teach lessons. I said, because of all the stories they could have chose, they did choose certain ones to teach a message. And I said, Daniel is one of them. Because there is a play on words here, folks, that I want you to think about. It says Nebuchadnezzar took God's vessels to his homeland. He did take the vessels out of the temple. He did take the precious vessels from Jerusalem. We happen to know 4 of their names. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were God's vessels. Do you know that we're all vessels? The amazing thing about vessels, God even told this to Jeremiah. He said the potter goes out and he makes the clay jar. And what happens? If it's broken, what does he do? If it's marred in any way, what does he do? Well, you know, I went in the Dollar Tree to buy this cup. And I looked on the shelf, and as I looked at all those cups, I'm not going to tell you where they were made, but they were supposed to be all the same cups. But as I looked at them, some of them, the handle was a little bit lower than others. Some of them, they were all supposed to be one color blue paint, but it was a little bit off, you understand? Some of them, you look around the ridge, the lip of the cup, and there was little chips in there. And I'm thinking, why didn't they throw these out? Because they're in Dollar Tree. What does that mean? If Dollar Tree is selling them to you for $1, how much did they pay for them? You know, these aren't the ones that go to Tiffany. You understand? You're not going to see these cups on display even at Corning. Do you know, as a kid, growing up in upstate New York, we went to Corning many, many times. You know what Corning is? Wait a minute, does anyone have Corel? The dishes and everything? Who makes it? Corning! You know, we were there, we would watch the guys blow the glass. We watched them make the plates and everything. If they found one mar, you know what they did? They broke it. Nothing goes out. Do you understand? God says the potter makes the clay. Now, it's interesting. I hope you know this. If you don't, you'll know it today. Does anyone know? In the beginning, God created man. He formed him of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became. Do you know what the 2 words are? It's a play on words. A real story. It really happened. Adam is the same word as red clay. For those of you who think that Adam, when he came out, looked like me, chances are he looked more like an American Indian. I'm sorry, someone from the First Nation. God says we're clay pots. We're clay pots. Some of us come out and we look a little different than others. Some of us are taller. Some of us are shorter. Some of us are wider. Some of us are narrower. We all look different. But we're all vessels. Paul says that we're a vessel for God. God takes us and He pours out a blessing on other people through us. Read about it in 2 Corinthians 4. The whole chapter is about us being God's vessels. Nebuchadnezzar took the vessels from the house of God, but what he didn't know is he was taking real vessels. And on that 6-month trip, all the Israelites could decide, were they going to be grumblers and complainers? Or were they going to maintain their integrity with God? Where did they draw the line? Did they say, God allowed us to be destroyed and end up in Babylon? Forget God. Or did they say, Jeremiah the prophet said, submit, and I'm not going to change who I am? It says here in verse 3, let's see where you would draw the line. Let's see where Daniel and his friends drew the line. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court officials. Shame on the NIV. I would hope yours would use the correct word there. It's not court officials here, folks. He's the chief of the eunuchs. Who's a eunuch? Anybody know who a eunuch is? Yeah, he's what we call a castrated male. He's somebody who always sings soprano. Okay? Remember, they used to do this in the Middle Ages with boys, so that they, because remember, women couldn't be part of the choirs. Okay? So they would, whoop, slip of the knife, and the boy always sings soprano. You understand? Daniel and his 3 friends were put into the eunuchs. Here it's bad enough they have to walk for 6 months. It's bad enough we don't even know what they ate. It's bad enough they've got to be in a country that they don't want to be in. And the first thing they do, where's your line? Would that be it for you? Remember, what's one of the most important things for the Jewish people? To what? To have kids. If you want to make one of them mad or angry, this meant Daniel and his 3 friends would not have children. That's very important. I don't know how important it is to you, but for them, that is the call for the Jewish nation. That was the call from the Bible. It said what? The first thing Nebuchadnezzar does to Daniel and his friends is, shoo. I remember not too long ago, a church member in another church not far from here, he called me and he said, Pastor, I need to have prayer with me. I said, what's happening? He said, I'm going in for surgery, but don't tell anybody. I said, what's the surgery? I'm getting circumcised. He's a man. So you know my first question, why? He said, well, you know, Mom and Dad didn't do it. And I said, why now? He said, Pastor, I'm having some complications. And the doctor said that's the best thing they can do for it, to help out. And they hope it's going to happen, so I really need your prayer. And I said, all right. He said, but don't tell anybody. I haven't told you, have I? Did I tell you his name? No. Okay, you don't know who he is. Okay. But I can remember going and praying with him, and he was very worried. He said, Pastor, what if the knife slips? I said, well, chances are this guy has done it a lot. He said, but he's done it on babies. And I said, not much different. He said, oh, there's a lot of difference. He said, it's going to take me 6 months to heal. Now, I don't know if that would, I'm just telling you. So you can imagine, I did pray with him, and I waited, prayed at the time of the surgery, waited, got no answer, so I decided it was time to text. So I texted him and said, what happened? He says, I'm okay. I said, how does it feel? Shouldn't I say that? Is that a fair term to say to him? He said, well, I'm all bandaged up. He said, but they said they did a good job. They said I'm going to heal nicely. And I said, good. That's the good news. What about Daniel and his friends? Think they had Kaiser? Think that Nebuchadnezzar said, you got Kaiser, you're going to the Kaiser doctors, they're going to do the job. How do you think they did it? Do you think they had to use 3 or 4 guys to hold them down? I'm trying to paint the picture here. Where did they draw the line? Where would you draw the line? Is that enough to give up God? Well, apparently for Daniel and his 3 friends, it didn't change their belief in God. Because they had decided that when they left Jerusalem, they were going to remain faithful to God no matter what happened to them. And they did not draw the line. In fact, it says here in the next verse, verse 5, he looked for people without physical defect then, and he did what? He trained them in his language and literature and studies. Would you draw the line there? First thing he does, castrates them. Second thing he does, he re-educates them. Some would draw that line already, wouldn't they? I talk to people all the time. My kid's not going to that school. I don't know what they teach there. You understand? I'm talking about the Adventist school, they say that. They would rather send their kids to public school, be exposed to all the teaching that they have there, rather than go to Adventist school. I don't understand it. Apparently they drew the line at the Adventist school. And I'll tell you what, for this couple, it had nothing to do with money. Oh yeah. Should I tell you what they drove? Can I? I'll only tell you one car that they have. They have the Tesla SUV. Does anyone know how much that cost? Last I checked, $120. It wasn't about money. They just didn't want to send their kid to the Adventist school. They drew the line. Daniel and his friend says, hey, we don't mind. Hey, it'd be fun to learn another language. You understand? Hey, it'd be interesting to see how these people believe. They don't believe in creation, or do they? Did you ever read the Babylonian creation story? Look it up. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Have you ever read it? It's an amazing story. It's a long way away from creation. Sort of, kind of. Even has a flood story, Babylon. Well, they should believe in it. Tower of Babel was built after the flood. Daniel and his friends said, we're not drawing the line. Well, let's find out what else happened to them. The king then assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Verse 6, among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Did you know that was their names? Everybody I talk to say it's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why does everyone call them by their heathen names? That isn't their name. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So now, he's done 2 things to them. They haven't drawn a line yet. Okay, you castrated us. All right. Number 2, you re-educated us. All right, that's fine. 3, third thing he's going to do is going to change their names. You didn't like your name anyways, did you? Did you ever as a kid want to change your name? My brother changed his name. I have to tell you this. My brother may be watching. But from when I was the youngest, my brother was always Jim. And so one day, my mom had to go to school to see my brother Jim, and they had the names on all the desks. And I'm looking around, and I can't find his name. And the teacher turned to my mom and said, well, Paul's a pretty good student. And I said, Mom, who's Paul? She said, that's Jim. And I said, why don't they call him Jim? Because his name's Paul. Then where do we get Jim from? Do you know when my brother turned 18, he changed his name to Jim? You understand? They changed their name. Why? Because their names all represented who they worshiped. Daniel, judge for God. Hananiah. Azariah. What's the other one's name? Mishael, who is like God. He changed their names. The amazing thing, and some would say it's a little comical, but I think if I was Daniel, I wouldn't think it was comical. He gave them all new names. He gave Hananiah, Shadrach. He gave Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah he gave Abednego. But he gave Daniel the name of Belteshazzar. Now, you may have been told before what that name means, but I don't think so. Did you ever notice the similarity between Belteshazzar and Belshazzar? Did you notice there's only one difference between the two? The only difference is the T, the te. Belteshazzar, Belshazzar. The te makes it a female's name. Nebuchadnezzar said to Daniel, well, we've taken care of the male aspect of you. I'm going to give you a girl's name. Sort of to rub it in. You'll even notice in chapter 4 he says, that's the name I gave him. It's not his real name. That's what Nebuchadnezzar said. And it actually says, the word means, she is my protector. You know, you always hear those stories about guys going in jail and they call them the girl's name. That's what he said. Can you imagine? Daniel left Jerusalem to go to Babylon, and he hasn't drawn the line yet. You can call me a girl's name if you want. He hasn't drawn the line. Why? Is something wrong with Daniel? What if they gave you a girl's name? What do you draw the line on? You may not like it what Daniel and his friends drew the line on. Or maybe you don't understand it. It says, verse 8, the key verse in chapter 1 and the book of Daniel. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food and wine. Wait a minute. He allowed him to castrate him. He allowed him to give him a girl's name. He allowed him to re-educate him. But the minute he started messing with his food, can't mess with anyone's food. That's almost like going to someone's house and taking the remote control. Did you ever notice that? You can't go into anyone's house and sit in their chair and take their remote. Can you? I think that's in America. You can't do it. Right? You know what I'm talking about. Okay? That's why when I go in the house, I always say, where can I sit? Now, Rudy, he lets me sit in his chair, though. Okay? But he didn't give me the remote. Okay? And he didn't give Cadiz the remote. Okay? Daniel says, no. Wait a minute. He's done everything else. Now, wait a minute. Don't you think Daniel should have said, you know what? I'll just take the food and I'll pour it out. Yeah. Then the king will never know I didn't eat his food. You understand? Couldn't he do that? Couldn't you do that? I'm not going to tell him I worship God on Sabbath. I'll just swap with somebody else so I don't have to work. They'll never know that I keep the Sabbath day. Do you think God allowed his vessels to go to Babylon for a reason? Did he want them to be hidden in a corner? Daniel publicly says, I'm not going to eat it. You know, they'll never know if I push the ham on the side of the plate. I know one of my pastor friends is watching, but I won't tell his name. I can remember. We had to go to a seminar once, and we forgot to tell him that we were vegetarian. It was a big ministers' convention. And to this day, it just makes me laugh. I'm always saying, and I laughed with him about it, but he didn't think it was funny. So they gave everyone a sack lunch, and inside the sack lunch was ham and cheese sandwiches. So you know what he did. He opened up the sandwich, took the ham off, and ate the sandwich. And I said, wasn't the ham on the cheese? I gave him my sandwich. He ate it with relish. He loved it. Daniel and his friends. Why now do they make a stink? Why did they draw the line now? They said, we're not crossing that line. Is it really about food here? If you think it's about food, we're in trouble today. Do you really think Daniel made a stink about the food? If you've read this book of Daniel before, after today, read it again, and you'll see that it's not about being a vegetarian versus not vegetarian. If you want to find it, read Romans, the parallel, Romans 14. It's not about vegetarianism versus non-vegetarianism. Remember, a Jew could never be a vegetarian. Why? They have to eat the Passover lamb. If they didn't eat the Passover lamb, the rest of the year they could not eat, they could go without meat. But they had to eat the Passover lamb. That's almost like being in America, you have to eat turkey at Thanksgiving, don't you? No, it's not even similar. Okay, all right. You know, that was supposed to be the national bird. Do you know? Ben Franklin wanted that to be the national bird. And Americans were upset with him, but he was so true. He said, it's the bird that only represents Americans. The turkey is just like what Americans are, not the eagle. That's what he said. And remember, he was an American. Okay. And they eat it. That's what he said. That was his big thing, you know. They even eat it. They even eat the bird that they're like. Okay. This is not about Daniel choosing to be a vegetarian. Because remember, for all captives, if you could eat what the king eats, you're eating the best. They considered this the best. What was it? Why is that word, those two words there? Daniel purposed in his heart. Didn't he purpose in his heart that they wouldn't castrate him? Didn't he purpose in his heart that he was going to escape at his first opportunity and go back to Jerusalem? Didn't he purpose in his heart that he wouldn't be re-educated and taught a new language? Didn't he purpose in his heart that you're not going to give me a girl's name? Why now does he draw the line? Or was the line always there? The key word, not only purposed, he was determined. Notice that's what purpose means. He was determined. He didn't say this softly. He didn't send a text and hope they read it. He went to him in person and said, "We will not. Give us 10 days. What was it? Why wouldn't he? Because you see, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah all knew that they were a vessel for God, taken to Babylon to be used for a purpose. And they would not allow that vessel to be defiled. Because what he's talking about here is if he ate that food for Daniel and his 3 friends, they would begin worshiping another God. And you see, Daniel, in spite of what they called him, he was still judged for God. And you know the story. I love the story. And people do sometimes use this to say, but it's true. If you change your diet in 10 days, you're going to see some difference. Okay? You're going to sleep at night, going to get a little thinner, going to start looking good. Okay? And that's what it says here, doesn't it? It says, verse 12, please test us for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then compare our appearances with that of the young men who eat the royal food and treat your servants according to what you see. Now, it's true. We're talking about Daniel. He was gluten-free. Okay? Non-GMO. You understand? He was drinking alkaline water. You understand the whole bit. 10 days. It's going to change you. Okay? I believe it was alkaline water 9.5. Not 6.5. Okay? You with me? What happened? At the end of 10 days, did you... Now, who else was part of this group? Was there only 4 Hebrews part of this group? From the figure that we are you ready for this? I didn't tell you at the beginning. It's probably somewhere around 500 people were taken from Jerusalem. We don't know how many survived. But it wasn't only Daniel and the 3 Hebrews that were the Hebrews. But it says at the end of 10 days, only these 4 guys appeared what? It says they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate at the royal table. Verse 16, so the guard took away their choice food. He ate it. You don't want it? I'll eat it. And the wine they drank, and he gave them vegetables instead. They ate a poor man's diet. You ever eaten a poor man's diet? Every country you go to, it's something a little bit different, okay? Yep, it's frijoles and tortillas if you go down south, okay? If you go out west, it's what? Pretty much rice. Pretty much rice. So what happened to these 4 men? If you miss this, you miss the whole chapter. To these 4 men. What 4 men? The 4 men who drew the line and said, we're not going to pass. There was more people that were there. Sometimes we think it was just 4 Hebrews and the rest were from everywhere else. No. These 4 guys said, I'm not eating it. These 4 guys said, we're here for a reason. We may not like the circumstances. We may sing soprano in the choir the rest of our lives. But we're drawing a line today. We're going to worship God and Him only. How does God respond to that? Would God just have loved them as much as if they sat at that table and gorged themselves on the king's food? I guess you have to answer that question. Would He? Does God love the guy? Did you read about this? You should have read about it. It was in the San Francisco paper. There was a guy in the city, San Francisco. He tipped the scales just over 400. And every day he went to a Chinese buffet. Do you remember the story? And he'd eat about 10 plates full. So one day the Chinese owner got upset and said, no, you don't get to eat the plates. You eat 1 plate and gone. The guy said, it's a buffet. He said, not a buffet for you. So the guy took him to court. And you know what the judge said? If you have a buffet that says all you can eat, then if he eats 20 plates, he can eat 20 plates. Does God still love this guy? I kind of liked him, you know? The Chinese restaurant stopped offering buffet. Okay? I don't know, I go to all those eat places, I can only eat 1 plate and sometimes don't finish that. You understand? They make out on me, okay? This guy they don't make out on, okay? Does God still love him? What happened to Daniel and his friends that didn't happen to everybody else? God gave. You see, God has so much that He wants to give us, but we don't want it. We haven't drawn the line. God says when you draw the line, you get the gifts. If you don't draw the line, you don't get the gifts. God still loves us. What did He give them? He gave them knowledge, understanding, literature, learning, and Daniel, He gave visions and dreams. And at the end of the time, there was nobody that compared to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You remember the statement, God wants to do for us more than we can ask or think. The problem is we haven't drawn the line. We keep moving the line. One of my favorite verses in all the Bible, and I have to say it was a favorite verse before I saw the movie. I didn't see it in the movies, though. Thank you. Okay, I drew the line. I had to see the movie. I believe the movie came out in 1980. There you go. Okay, and I saw it on VHS. Okay. It was about Eric Liddell. You all know who Eric Liddell was? They gave him a name. And the reason it has come back up is some of you know that Carice likes to watch Thomas and his friends, the little tank engine. Well, they added a new figure to it. The train is called the Flying Scotsman. And she said, Daddy, why would they name him the Flying Scotsman? That's a funny name. And I said, actually, the train was actually named the Flying Scotsman because of the speed that it went from Edinburgh to London, from Scotland to England. It was actually a British train. But there was a man by the name of Eric Liddell who wanted to run in the Olympics. He became a famous missionary to China. And they say that he was so fast, they called him the Flying Scotsman. Eric Liddell was destined to be a preacher. He was destined to dedicate his life to God, but he knew he could run and nobody could beat him. And you might remember the story when he was there ready to go to the Olympics. The race that he wanted to run was on Sunday. And he was struggling whether to run the race because God had given him the abilities to run, or should, because of his faith, should he draw the line. He was destined to win 5 gold medals. Nobody could compete with him. And one day, there in Scotland, he was preaching. And somebody, he didn't even know who it was, slipped him a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper was written one verse of the Bible. 1 Samuel 2:30. Now, you have to be somebody that knows the Bible to know what it is. It didn't say what the verse says. It only said 1 Samuel 2:30. And you always remember it because it's 1, 2, 3, 0. Now you're always going to remember it. Because in there, God is speaking to his high priest, Eli. And it says this, he who honors me, I will honor. We're not talking about love here. God loves everybody. He sent Jesus to die for everybody. But those who honor God, he honors. Daniel and his 3 friends said, we're in a country we don't want to be. We're in situations and circumstances we don't want to be. But there's one thing that we're going to do. We're going to honor God. And guess what happened? God honored them. Daniel 1 is about drawing the line. Have you drawn the line? Have you drawn the line to say, this is as far as I'm going and no more? Because if you haven't, you're going to be pushed a long way from God. All of us need to decide how far we're going. Jesus said it this way, Father, I can't drink this cup, but if you want me to drink it, I'm going to do it. And they abused Jesus. They crucified Jesus. They spit on him. They called him every possible name that you can think of. And then they stripped him naked and hung him on a cross. And all he could say was, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Daniel and his friends decided to draw the line. And God honored them because they were willing to honor God. Let us pray. Father, in each of our lives, I don't know what everyone's going through. I don't know what they're struggling with. But Father, in their life, may they choose to honor you. There may be somebody here today, Lord, that would just like to raise their hand and say, Lord, I'm going to purpose in my heart like Daniel that I will not defile myself, but I am going to draw the line and stand for you. Father, you see all the hands that have gone up today. Honor our faith. Honor us as we honor you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.